My name is Zab Alavi, and what I am about to tell you is more than just a memory. It is the beginning of a turning point that has transformed everything I believed to be true. My life was like a book written in permanent ink, where each page followed a set pattern, with no room for questions or deviations. I was born and raised in Tehran, in the vibrant heart of Iran, where traditions are more than customs. They are sacred rules. My family was deeply committed to the Islamic faith. Religion was not just a practice. It was the foundation of who we were, the air we breathed, the language with which we learned to see the world. My father was a serious man, respected and even feared in our community, known for his strict adherence to the laws and teachings of Islam. The words of the Quran came out of his mouth with almost poetic precision, as if each verse were carved into his soul. My mother, though softer in her gestures and tone, carried the same silent but deep devotion. It was common to see her sitting in the corner of the living room, her eyes half closed in prayer, her lips moving discreetly as her fingers glided over the beads of her tasbih. The almost hypnotic sound of the beads rubbing against each other was a kind of soundtrack to my childhood. I grew up in an environment where questioning was not only discouraged, it was unthinkable. From a young age, I was taught to pray 5 times a day, to memorize verses from the Quran, and to discipline myself to the traditions that had shaped generations before me. For me, that was all there was. Islam was not a choice. It was the very definition of my identity, a mold into which my life was carefully fitted, and I honestly knew no other reality, until one seemingly ordinary detail began to plant the first seeds of doubt. My father decided to enroll me in a private school run by Armenians. It was a curious choice, considering our background and faith, but he did not do it out of religious affinity. It was purely for academic prestige. The school's reputation was impeccable, and my father believed that I would receive a solid education there. What he perhaps did not expect was that this innocent choice would bring about a quiet turnaround, almost imperceptible at first, but which would later come crashing down like an avalanche on everything I knew. Armenians are the largest ethnic minority in Iran, and many of them are Christians. At first, this made me uncomfortable. Attending a school where most of my classmates did not share my faith seemed strange, even risky. I expected coldness, perhaps even hostility. But what I found was just the opposite. They were welcoming people, with a kindness so natural that it left me confused. I still vividly remember my first day of school. I walked into the classroom with uncertain steps, trying to appear confident, when I saw a group of girls chatting and laughing naturally. One of them, her name was Laylet, smiled at me with a lightness that completely disarmed me. She wore a necklace with a small cross that swung gently over her chest. I couldn't help but stare at her for a few seconds. "Are you Muslim?" she asked, without a trace of judgment, just genuine curiosity. I nodded, a little defensively. "Okay," she replied, still smiling. "We're glad you're here." Those simple, unpretentious words struck me unexpectedly. That effortless kindness. I didn't know how to react. As the days went by, I began to notice something different about those colleagues. They spoke about Jesus with a naturalness that surprised me, not as a distant prophet, but as someone they were intimate with, as if he were present in their everyday conversations. When they mentioned God, it was not with fear or excessive reverence, but with love, almost with joy. They did not quote long passages of sacred texts, nor did they try to convert anyone. They simply lived what they believed, and they did so with a lightness that intrigued me. One day during recess, I noticed a group of them sitting in a circle on the schoolyard. They were holding hands, eyes closed, praying quietly. There was no pretense, no stiffness. Their words were soft, full of gratitude and hope. It was a different kind of prayer than any I had ever heard. There was no obligation here, just a sincere desire to talk to someone they clearly loved. It stuck with me. I didn't say anything, but inside me, a question began to echo silently. What if there is more? Months passed, and my curiosity grew like a fire hidden in the ashes. I began to listen more attentively when they spoke of Jesus. To me, until then, Isa, as he is known in Islam, was just one of many prophets. A respectable man, of course, but human. But in the words of Lilette and the others, Jesus seemed much more than that. One day, overcome by this growing curiosity, I asked her why Christians use the cross as a symbol. She smiled and answered with the same simplicity as always. It is to remember what Jesus did for us. He died on the cross to save us from our sins because he loves us. These words stunned me. To love, to die for someone, for myself? It was a completely foreign concept. In Islam, we speak of submission, of obedience, of reverent fear of God. But love, and a love that surrenders itself in this way, it unsettled me. For the first time, I began to wonder if there was something more to this story, something I had never heard before. It was during a literature class, one of those in which the teacher challenged us to go beyond the obvious, that something unusual happened. He assigned us to research important historical texts, asking us to choose a significant work to do a project on. I never imagined that this simple school assignment could bring me so close to such a profound transformation. In the old school library, with its narrow aisles and the smell of old paper, I wandered aimlessly among the shelves, absent-mindedly running my fingers along the spines of the books. Then, almost by chance, my gaze fell on a volume with a worn cover, grimy with age and little used. It was a Bible, a real Bible, not a mention, not a quotation, but the very book that so many in my faith considered forbidden, almost dangerous. My heart raced. I looked around, as if someone might appear at any moment and rebuke me. I reached out hesitantly, as if that cover might burn me, and yet I touched it. My fingers were trembling as I pulled it from the shelf. Opening that book was like crossing an invisible boundary, and deep down, I knew it. The pages were thin, fragile, as if they held something that didn't want to be revealed easily. I leafed through them slowly, trying to convince myself that it was just academic curiosity, that everything was fine. But then my eyes landed on a sentence that seemed to be waiting for me. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." The words seemed to glow on the page, almost alive. They stood out so clearly that for a moment, everything else faded away. They were simple, and yet so powerful that something inside me trembled. I felt seen, like someone knew exactly what I was like inside. I closed the book suddenly, almost frightened by what I had felt. I put it back on the shelf in a hurry, trying to erase that moment. But it was too late. The words had clung to my soul like seeds in the wind, waiting only for the right time to bloom, and they would not leave me anymore. At home, everything was as usual. My father remained firm in his expectations. He wanted me to be an exemplary student, to keep the family honor intact, to one day marry someone he approved of, someone who shared our faith, our traditions. He often said, "You are a reflection of our home. Never forget who you are or where you came from." And I nodded, obedient as I had always been. But inside, a new tension was beginning to grow. The words of the Bible still echoed within me, and with them, a weariness I had never named, a question I did not yet know how to ask. I couldn't tell anyone, not even my mother, with all her quiet tenderness. I knew that any hint of doubt would be met with concern, perhaps even rebuke, so I kept quiet. But at the same time, I began to observe more. The more I got to know the Christians around me, the more I realized that there was something different about the way they lived, not out of obligation, but out of conviction. They weren't afraid to show vulnerability. They didn't hide their pain or pretend to be unattainable perfection. It was a faith that walked hand in hand with their wounds, and that moved me. When I graduated from high school, I was no longer the same teenager I had been before. I still didn't fully understand the Christian faith, but I felt a growing respect for those who followed it. I admired their kindness, the serene peace they seemed to carry, and the courage they had to live out their beliefs, even in an environment where it could cost them everything. Still, I put those thoughts aside when it was time to leave for college. I told myself it was just a phase, that everything would go back to normal. But deep down, I knew my story was just beginning. The new city I moved to wasn't as bustling as Tehran, but it had a vibrancy all its own, a mix of tradition and resistance, like a flame that refused to go out. The narrow streets were alive with street vendors, the smell of spices, and the noisy markets. But it was on the university campus that I felt something truly new. For the first time, I was away from the watchful eyes of my family, away from the whispers of neighbors, away from the weight of representing something that no longer defined me. I soon realized that this place was different. There was a quiet freedom in the air. I saw women walking around without veils, men reading books that were considered inappropriate, and rumors of secret gatherings where people worshipped freely, even at the risk of severe punishment. It was as if there was an undercurrent of faith and the search for truth that escaped the eyes of the authorities. And it was there, in that fertile and dangerous terrain, that my thirst for answers found new avenues. During my second week at university, While I was sorting through my materials in the library, I caught a whispered conversation among some students at a nearby table. They were huddled together, speaking softly, but I heard clearly when one of them mentioned the name of Jesus. My ears automatically perked up. I pretended to be busy with my papers, but I couldn't stop listening. They were not speaking as if they were studying a historical figure, but as if they were talking about a close friend, a real person. Later that day, I recognized one of the people in the group. Her name was Layla. She was also in my philosophy class. She had an easy, confident manner and a smile that conveyed a strange, comforting peace. When class ended, she approached me casually. "Hey, Zab," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "Want to have some tea with me? I was thinking about talking a little about today's lecture." I hesitated. Something inside me still felt on edge, but there was something in her tone, in her presence, that made me want to say yes. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual. We sat in a small cafe on the outskirts of campus. The place was cozy, with yellow lights and the smell of mint and fresh bread. The conversation flowed with a surprising ease. She asked me about my life in Tehran, my family, how I was adapting to university. I said more than I intended. I also asked about her life, and it was then, between sips of tea and shy laughter, that she said something that caught me completely off guard. We were in the same cafe, the sweet aroma of rose tea filling the air, when Layla said the words with the naturalness of someone talking about the weather. "My family is Christian." She said it in a calm, almost carefree tone, as if it wasn't something that could, in that country, completely change the way people saw her. I tried to contain my surprise, but my gaze must have revealed more than my mouth. "Ah," I murmured, trying to sound neutral. She just smiled, as if she understood the other person's reaction perfectly. "I know it's not common here," she added. "We have to be careful, but I've never been ashamed of who I am." Those simple words, "I am not ashamed of who I am," resonated in my mind for days. They were brave, firm words, and yet spoken with a gentleness that made them all the more powerful. I had never known what it was like to not feel ashamed, to not carry doubts, to not hide questions inside, and it touched me deeply. A few weeks later, Layla extended an invitation. We were sitting under a tree on campus on a golden afternoon. She looked at me with that same kind smile and said, "Some friends and I are going to get together. We'll talk about life, read some books, pray together. You're more than welcome to come." She didn't say outright that it was a Christian gathering. She didn't need to. I knew. My first reaction was to refuse. I can't. What if someone finds out? But that old curiosity, that spark that had been born back in the library, when I had first leafed through the Bible, was rekindled. Against all logic, I accepted. On the night of the meeting, I walked to the outskirts of town, to the house Layla had described. It was modest, with a simple, unassuming exterior. The meeting was taking place in the basement. As I walked down the stairs, my heart was pounding, as if I were breaking some sacred law, and in a way I was. This was a hidden world, a forbidden world, and I was about to walk through its doors. There were about 15 people gathered there. They sat in a circle on the floor, some with Bibles in their hands, others with their eyes closed, in silence. The atmosphere was serene, and despite the fear that accompanied me, I felt something welcoming. No one looked at me suspiciously. No one questioned me about what I believed or why I was there. Layla introduced me casually, and the leader of the group, a man named Amir, began to speak. His voice was calm, but there was a force behind it that held your attention. He spoke about love, forgiveness, hope, not as abstract concepts, but as real, lived experiences. He told stories from the Bible, but in such a vivid way that it felt as if the characters were in the room with us. After that, they sang, soft hymns, full of restrained emotion. They weren't songs to entertain, they were sung prayers, and somehow they penetrated me. A peace that I had never felt in any mosque, I felt there, in the basement of a simple house, among people who risked everything for their faith. At the end of the meeting, Amir approached me with a kind, steady gaze. He held out his hand and handed me a small pocket Bible. "Take it," he said. "You don't have to read it, but if you ever feel like it, it's yours." I looked at the little book in his hands, hesitated for a moment, then took it. He nodded with a slight smile. I walked out of that house with the Bible clutched to my chest, as if I were carrying something precious and dangerous at the same time. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I turned on the lamp, and with trembling hands, opened the little book. I flipped through the pages at random. My eyes fell on a verse that seemed to have been written directly for me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I stood still. The words seemed impossible to ignore. How could anyone say that? In Islam, all prophets are respected, but none would place themselves above the others. This was something new, something bold. It was as if Jesus was not just a messenger, he was the message itself. I continued to attend meetings over the next few weeks. Each meeting was a breath of life, and at the same time, a growing burden. I began to ask Layla and Amir questions. Who was Jesus really? What did it mean to follow him? What was salvation? And they always answered me patiently, with tenderness, never with pressure, never with judgment. One day, I could no longer contain my restlessness and asked Amir something that haunted me. Why do you risk so much for this faith? Do you know what could happen if you get caught? He looked at me with compassionate eyes and responded with a calmness that disconcerted me. Because it's true, Zab. When you experience the love of Jesus, you simply can't live the way you used to. He gives us courage, even when the world tries to silence us. Those words broke me inside, because I knew he spoke with conviction, with the certainty of someone who had already lost so much, perhaps everything, for what he believed in. And yet, he was there, whole. The more time I spent with them, the more torn I felt. My heart was tugged at their faith, at this hope I had never known. But my mind was overwhelmed with fear. What would my family say? What would my father do if he found out? What would happen to me? One night, as I sat alone in my room with my pocket Bible in my hands, I prayed in a way I had never prayed before. It was simple, raw, painfully honest. God, I whispered, if you're real, if Jesus is really who they say he is, show me. I don't want to be lost. I just want to know the truth. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't expect a light from the sky or an audible voice. But there, in the silent darkness of my room, for the first time, I felt a breath, a presence, a hope, as if something, or someone, was listening to me. Little did I know that the road I was walking would begin to narrow, that the next steps would be more difficult, more dangerous than anything I had ever experienced. On the outside, my life went on as normal. I attended classes, spent time with my friends, called my family once a week, and pretended that everything was under control. But on the inside, a storm was brewing. The words of the Bible, the compassionate conversations, the gentle hymns, and the way the Christian community lived their faith, all of it was pulling me toward a new path. It was as if a small but insistent light was drawing me out of an ancient darkness. But there was another force inside me, equally powerful, that tried to keep me where I had always been. Fear. Fear of my family. Fear of my culture. Fear of breaking away from everything I had known. I felt torn between two worlds. One was the life I had known since I was a child. The rules, the customs, the silence, the burden of being the daughter who upheld the honor of the house. The other was this new world, where people spoke to God as if he were close, where there was forgiveness, freedom, and a peace that no matter how hard I tried, I could not forget. I remember one afternoon in particular. We had just finished a meeting in the basement of the small house. The group was dispersing, and I was saying goodbye to Layla when, as I was leaving, I noticed a man leaning on the corner of the street. He looked ordinary. Plain jeans, a worn-out coat, just any man. But there was something about the way he was looking at me, something too direct, too cold. My stomach turned. I walked past him quickly, keeping my head down, trying to appear distracted. The next day, Amir gathered us together and spoke quietly but firmly. We have to be more careful. There's surveillance in the area. A brother was arrested last week for attending house church. The words hit like a bucket of ice water. My heart raced. I knew the risks, of course, but hearing it said out loud, it made it painfully real. It was no longer an abstract fear. It was a threat knocking at the door. Later, Layla pulled me aside. You don't have to keep coming if you're scared, she said gently. I shook my head, trying to sound strong. I'm not scared, I lied. But the truth was, I was terrified. A few days later, I received a call from my father. His familiar voice filled the silence of my room like a heavy draft. Zab, how are your studies going? They are going well, Baba, I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. He continued with the solemnity he always carried. What about your prayers? Are you holding firm to them? I hesitated for a split second. Yes, Baba, I lied again. The truth is, I had stopped praying the way I used to. Every time I tried to recite the traditional words, they seemed hollow and distant. It was like talking to someone who no longer listened to me. Instead, I found myself remembering the prayers I had prayed in meetings, the spontaneous, sincere, intimate ones. I had never imagined that it was possible to talk to God like that, and it changed me inside. When the call ended, his words echoed in my mind. Don't forget who you are and where you came from. I felt guilty, torn, but deep down, I no longer knew who I was. Later that week, I opened my pocket Bible again, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. I was suffocating. I read the first chapter of the Gospel of John, and one sentence struck me like a ray of light. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. It broke me. How I wanted this light, how I longed for it. But how? How could I accept this light without completely erasing the world I came from? That night, I had a dream I will never forget. In the dream, I was walking alone through a long, narrow, dark tunnel. Fear enveloped me like a heavy veil. I could not see the end. I could not see a way out. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of me holding a small lamp. His face was serene. His eyes seemed to see right through me. He did not shout. He did not order me. He simply said in a soft voice, "Follow me." I woke up with tears on my face. I knew it. It was Jesus. The next day, I told Amir everything. He listened intently, and at the end, he just smiled, his eyes shining. "It's a sign," he said. "Jesus is calling you, Zab." And my voice shook as I replied, "I don't know if I can do it. What if I lose everything?" He placed a tender hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to take the first step." But taking that step was like jumping off a cliff in the dark. I didn't know if there would be ground on the other side. And yet, something inside me said, "Go." A week later, everything fell apart. It was night. We were leaving another meeting. I was saying goodbye to Layla with a hug when I saw him again, the same man from the corner. But this time he wasn't alone. 2 others accompanied him, and the 3 of them walked toward me with determined steps. My body froze. They stopped me in the middle of the street. "Where have you been?" one of them asked, his voice hard and accusatory. "At a friend's house," I lied, trying to sound calm. But my voice wasn't steady. They didn't believe me. One of them snatched my bag from my shoulder and started rummaging through it. It all happened so fast, until he found the Bible, that little pocket Bible. He held it up like a trophy. "Do you think you can bring this filth into our country?" One of them sneered, his eyes shining with contempt. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body was paralyzed by fear. I was taken to a dark, narrow, windowless room. There I was interrogated for hours. I was asked the same questions over and over again. Who else attends the meetings? Where do they take place? How long have you been involved? I was silent. I didn't answer. Not a word. I couldn't. The hours I spent in that dark room left a mark on me in a way that is difficult to explain. The questions did not cease, and when my refusal to answer began to irritate them, the threats came, harsh, cruel, spoken with the coldness of someone who wants to break not only the body, but the soul. "Do you know what happens to traitors like you?" one of the men growled, leaning down until his face was close to mine. "Your family will reject you. You will rot in prison, alone." His voice was sharp, dry. The words pierced my heart. Tears streamed freely down my face, but I remained silent anyway. Not out of bravery, but out of an inner conviction I could not explain. I just knew I could not betray these people. This faith, this thing that, although nascent, was becoming part of who I was. After hours, they finally let me go. Before they let me go, one of them looked me in the eye with a cynical smile and said, "We'll be watching you. One wrong move, and you'll regret it." I walked out of there with shaky legs and a broken mind. When I got to the dorm, the weight of everything hit me all at once. As soon as I locked the door behind me, I collapsed to the floor. It felt like the world was collapsing around me. My muscles were shaking, my mind a blur of fear and panic. I had never felt so much terror in my life. Hours later, in the early hours of the morning, Layla and Amir showed up. I didn't have to say anything. Layla just knelt down beside me, took my hand, and whispered, "You're braver than you think." I shook my head, my voice cracking. "I don't feel brave." Amir, with a serious but tender look in his eyes, said, "That's the cost of following Jesus, Zab. But he's with you. Always." I lay awake that night, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the Bible on the table. Amir's words echoed inside me. He is with you. But what if I can't handle it? What if I lose everything? It was there, in that piercing silence, that I made a decision. I could no longer live trapped between two worlds, trying to please everyone while losing myself every day. I knelt down, for the first time without fear of being watched, without rehearsing words, just me and God. Jesus, I whispered, my heart wide open. If you are who you say you are, I give you my life. I can't do this alone anymore. Help me, please. It wasn't a pretty prayer. It wasn't rehearsed, but it was real. It was my soul laid bare before him. At that very moment, something happened. I didn't see lights. I didn't hear voices, but I felt it. A deep, inexplicable peace wrapped around my body like a blanket on a cold night. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. As if someone was hugging me from the inside, saying, "Now you are not alone anymore." But along with the peace, I knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be harder than anything I had ever experienced. The days after my arrest were a blur of tension. Every step I took felt monitored. Every phone call, every walk to the corner, every appointment. It all felt like a calculated risk. I walked with my heart pounding, my senses on alert, as if every corner held a trap. But still, I couldn't pull away. It was as if something stronger than fear was pulling me back. Jesus had touched my heart, and no amount of surveillance, threats, or terror could erase that. One night, I followed my usual ritual and called home. My mother's voice on the other end of the line sounded familiar, soft as always, but there was something about the intonation. A pause here, a silence there, until she said, "Zob, your father wants to talk to you." My blood ran cold. It was rare for Baba to interrupt a call. That only happened when there was something serious, or grave. "Zob," he said, his voice filling the phone like a thunderstorm. "What am I hearing about you hanging out with Christians?" My body stilled. A shiver ran down my spine. How did he know? Did someone report me? Did the authorities contact my family? I tried to hide it. I stammered. I don't know what you're talking about, Baba." "Don't lie to me," he shouted, his voice cracking with anger. "We raised you to honor our faith, our family. Are you trying to shame us?" "I'm not doing anything wrong," I whispered, crying softly. "Stay away from these people," he ordered. "Do you understand me? Stay away, or don't bother coming home." The line went silent, just the background noise of the phone and my broken heart pounding in my chest. When the call ended, I stood there, staring into space. His words felt like knives on my skin, or don't bother coming home. My family meant everything to me. My father's approval, my mother's gentle touch as she brushed my hair, my brother's boisterous laughter when we were all together. Every memory, every face was a part of me. The thought of losing them was like losing a part of my soul. That night, I cried until I had no more strength. My body shook, empty, but in the midst of the pain, something strange happened. A subtle peace settled over me like dew, as if a presence were beside me, holding me with invisible arms, whispering to my spirit, "I'm with you." Weeks passed. The tension was still there, the fear was still there, but my faith, it grew. Then one evening, after another silent, reverent gathering, Amir approached me. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes, a soft anticipation, almost like a subdued celebration. "Zob," he said quietly, "some of us are going to perform a baptism next week. It's dangerous, but if you're ready, it's an important step on your journey." He didn't pressure me. He just extended his hand. The time had come to decide, for real. Amir's proposal struck me like a thunderbolt, intense, enlightening, and yet terrifying. A baptism, a public declaration of faith, a step of no return. It was more than a ritual. It was a definitive break with everything I had been before. And in that moment, I realized that my walk with Christ required not just my heart, but my entire life. The thought filled me with conflicting emotions. On the one hand, my heart was pounding with a new, almost childlike excitement. But on the other, fear tightened around my chest like a chain. Being baptized was not just a spiritual symbol. It was also an act of rebellion in the eyes of the state, the culture, and my own family. I needed time. "I need to think about it," I replied to Amir, my voice low and shaky. He just nodded gently, as if he understood that this kind of decision wasn't made on impulse. For days, I struggled with that choice. I walked the city streets with empty eyes and a burning heart. I knew that baptism was more than a ceremony. It was a silent cry to the world. I belonged to Jesus, and once that step was taken, there would be no turning back. When the day finally arrived, I woke early, my body shaking, but a calm determination welling up within me. Amir had chosen a secluded spot outside the city, a hidden creek surrounded by thick trees and silence. The air was thick with anticipation, but also with an almost palpable fear. Everyone there knew the risk. We gathered in a small circle, and Amir spoke softly, explaining the meaning of baptism. "It's the burial of the old self and rebirth in Christ," he said, as the water flowed gently behind him. One by one, we stepped into the water. When it was my turn, my legs began to shake. Amir looked me in the eye and smiled. "Are you ready?" I nodded, almost silently. When he plunged me into the icy waters, something extraordinary happened. I felt as if all the weight of my past, the fear, the guilt, the doubt, was being lifted away. It was as if I was being washed clean from within, not just physically, but spiritually. As I emerged, the sun beat down on my face, and the tears that streamed down mingled with the drops of the stream. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of release. For the first time in my life, I knew I was his. But the joy of that precious moment was short-lived. A few days later, when I returned from campus, I found a neatly folded piece of paper pushed under my dorm room door. When I opened it, my hands began to shake. "We know what you did. There will be consequences." The words were written in rough script, and though simple, they carried a deadly weight. My heart raced. I looked around the hallway, but it was empty. The silence in that moment seemed to scream. I knew they had seen me. Later that night, the phone rang. The number was familiar, my brother's. I answered hesitantly. His voice, once so familiar and welcoming, was now cold, hard. "Zob, do you think we don't know? Do you think you can hide this from us?" I tried to answer, but my throat felt tight. "Hide what?" I whispered, even though I already knew exactly what he was talking about. "Don't play dumb," he exploded. "You have dishonored our family. Baba is furious. Mama won't stop crying. How could you do this to us?" "I didn't do anything wrong," I replied, my voice shaking. "You betrayed us," he shouted. "You are no longer part of this family." The line went dead. I sat there, frozen, with the phone still in my hand. The words echoed in my mind like a funeral bell. "You are no longer part of this family." For the next few days, I could barely eat or sleep. The pain of losing those I loved most, my parents, my siblings, my heritage, was overwhelming. It was as if a part of me had died. I had loved them deeply. Every childhood memory, every meal around the table, every laugh, now felt like ghosts, mocking my loneliness. But in the midst of despair, I remembered the words of Jesus, the ones I had read, and that never left my heart. "Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." I still didn't fully understand the meaning of those words, but at that moment, they gave me a glimmer of hope. If losing everything meant finding him, then maybe it was worth it. Layla and Amir didn't let me fall apart. They became more than friends. They became soul brothers. Layla held me in her arms as I cried, whispering, "You're not alone, Zob. We're your family now." They were simple words, but they were full of love. It was in them that I found the strength to carry on. It was in that small circle of clandestine Christians that I discovered a love that did not demand approval, that did not come with conditions. They accepted me with my wounds, my doubts, and my fear. A few days later, as I sat with Amir in the same cafe where we had spoken so many times, he said something that resonated with me deeply. "Zob, your story has power. God can use it to reach others who, like you, are seeking the truth." I was silent. The thought of sharing my story, of exposing it all, my pain, my rejection, my new faith, terrified me. But at the same time, something inside me agreed. I couldn't hide what Jesus had done for me. He had given me life, and life is not something to hide. The next few days were filled with tension. Living my faith in Iran was like walking on minefields. Every prayer, every encounter, every glance in my direction carried the possibility of the end. But my baptism had marked more than just my body with drops of water. It had marked my soul with conviction. I could not turn back. One afternoon, as I was leaving a prayer meeting, I noticed someone lurking in the shadows near the entrance. A quiet figure, but clearly alert. As I approached, the face emerged from the shadows. My heart sank. It was Daria, a fellow university student. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Zob," she said in a harsh, almost accusatory tone. "What are you doing here?" Time seemed to freeze in that instant. Daria had always been critical, even mocking of Christianity. She never hid her disdain, her conviction that it was a weak, alien faith, unbecoming of someone from our culture. So when she appeared in the shadows of the front door, my heart nearly stopped. "It's none of your business," I managed to say, my voice firmer than I expected. "Oh, but it is," she replied, a crooked smile on her lips. "Do you think no one notices your secret little life, Zob? You've changed, and I know why." I tried to turn around and leave, but she grabbed my arm tightly. "I could report her, you know," he hissed. "It would be so easy." I wrenched my arm from his grasp and walked away quickly, without looking back. But his words echoed in the days that followed like distant approaching thunder. How much did she know? And what was she willing to do with that knowledge? A week later, I and some fellow believers were quietly meeting in the apartment of a new convert. Layla and Amir were absent that night, a detail that would soon seem providential. We were in prayer, whispering praises, when suddenly, 3 sharp knocks shook the front door. "Open up, it's the police." The world stopped. Ibrahim signaled for everyone to remain calm, but his eyes were wide with panic. He walked to the door. Before he could even unlock it completely, it was kicked in, and armed men in black uniforms burst into the small apartment, shouting orders, kicking chairs, and turning over the furniture like hunting animals. "Identifications! Now!" one of them shouted, while another pulled out a backpack and took out Bibles, prayer books, and small gospel pamphlets. The officer's gaze darkened. "You're all under arrest," he barked. The cold handcuffs snapped shut around my wrists with the sound of a gate being locked from the inside. The drive to the detention center was silent, each of us immersed in an internal storm of fear, doubt, and, strangely present, prayer. We were separated upon arrival, placed in dark, damp rooms. Mine had almost no light. In front of me was a man with a cold gaze and a bulky briefcase. "Zob Alavi," he said dismissively. 22 years old, nice Muslim girl, respectable family. He leafed through the papers. What went wrong? Nothing went wrong, I muttered, barely recognizing my own voice. He slammed his hand down on the table. "Don't lie to me." Jumping in fright, I tried to maintain my composure. "You associated with Christians. You participated in illegal meetings. Do you have any idea what that means?" I was silent. He leaned forward, his voice lowered, but each word was a blade. "Do you know what happens to people like you? Do you think your family will protect you? They've already rejected you." His words hit me like invisible blows, but something inside me resisted. "You are wasting your life on lies," he continued. "Jesus can't save you, but if you cooperate, we can let you go." I closed my eyes for a moment. Tears wanted to come, but my voice didn't fail. "Jesus has already saved me." He narrowed his eyes, a brief signal, and 2 guards entered, pulling me from my chair. "Take her away," the man said, cold as ice. The cell they put me in was small, dirty, and smelled of mold and fear. 3 other women were there. One of them, with gray hair and tired eyes, looked at me with unexpected kindness. She spread out a corner of her thin blanket. "What are you in?" "Faith," I whispered. She nodded, as if she had heard this before. "You are not alone, child. God is with you. Even here." Those words, whispered in the darkness, were like a candle lit in a tunnel. My time in prison became a trial by fire. Constant interrogations, repeated questions, escalating threats. But I refused to give up the names of my brothers and sisters in Christ. I had lost one family. I would not lose another. After almost 3 weeks, I was called to appear in court. The guards dragged me from the cell. My knees were shaking, but my heart, miraculously, was steady. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I knew I would not get a fair trial. Not in Iran. To the state, my faith was treason, apostasy, a crime against God and the government. I had heard too many stories of believers who had disappeared without a trace, never to be seen again. Would I be one of them? The courtroom was a cold room with a high ceiling and old wooden chairs. A man in a long black robe and hard eyes looked at me with contempt. "Zob Alavi," he began, "you are accused of abandoning Islam, participating in illegal cults, and spreading Christian ideology among Iranian citizens. How do you plead?" I took a deep breath. I could deny it. I could lie and get out of there alive. But then, what kind of life would that be? I'm guilty, I said, my voice stronger than ever. I'm a Christian, and nothing's going to change that. The walls of the courtroom were high and oppressive, and the thick air seemed to hold the breath of everyone in it. My parents sat in the front rows. My father, his chin high and his gaze hard. My mother, stiff, her hands resting trembling in her lap. I searched her eyes, hoping to see a glimmer of love in them, but she looked away, as if looking at me would admit to a wound she didn't want to face. The judge entered. His expression was stony, cold, impassive. The silence was broken only by the clinking of footsteps on the floor. The trial began with harsh accusations. She abandoned Islam, the prosecutor declared in a grave voice. She desecrated the honor of her family and faith by converting to Christianity, an act punishable by law. I sat there, silent, but inside, I was praying, Lord, be with me. Don't leave me now. When it was my turn to speak, my hands were cold, and my voice wavered at first, but amid the tension, a deep peace came over me. I have not abandoned the faith, he said softly, and then louder, I have found it. A murmur ran through the room. The judge frowned. Jesus changed my life. He brought me peace when I had none. I am not against anyone, not against Islam, not against my family. I just followed the truth that I found in my heart. The judge banged his gavel. This court is not here for philosophical discourse. His voice was iron. You will face the consequences of your choices. The sentence came as a weight. 5 years in prison for apostasy and for spreading false teachings. My heart sank, but my faith remained. I remembered what Jesus said. If anyone wants to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. That was my cross. As I was escorted out of the courtroom, my father stood up and walked over to me. He looked into my eyes as if he were looking at a stranger. You destroyed this family, he said coldly. I no longer have a daughter. Those words pierced me like blades. I turned to my mother, searching for any sign of tenderness, but all I saw was pain and silence. The prison was everything I feared. Dark, damp, full of hostile stares. The guards were cruel. The other inmates shunned me, calling me unbeliever, traitor, unfaithful. But even there, in the deepest valley, Jesus was with me. In the dead of night, when everyone else was asleep, I would whisper prayers. Christ's presence was like a gentle fire that warmed me from within. Sometimes I would hear his voice in the silence. You are not alone. One day a guard called me. I have a visitor. I was led into a small room, lit only by a dim bulb. When I entered, I saw Amir. He was thinner, but his eyes were bright. Zab, he said tenderly. We have been praying for you every day. God is with you. These words were like fresh water to a thirsty soul. The months dragged on. 3, then 4. Interrogations continued, but I would not give in. I would not deny my faith. I would not betray anyone. I preferred prison to betrayal. Then one day, without warning, a guard opened the cell. Pack your things. You are being released. My eyes widened. What? You heard me. Don't make me repeat myself. Still not understanding, I was escorted to the prison gates. Outside, under a clear sky and bright sunshine, stood Amir and Layla. Their smiles radiated brighter than the day itself. We don't know how, Amir said, tears in his eyes, but God opened a door for you. When I stepped outside those gates, I felt the warmth of the sun, as if it were embracing me. Freedom had a scent I had never forgotten. Hope. But I also knew that I was not free in the ordinary sense. My name was tarnished. My family had rejected me, and I could no longer go back to the life I had before. Layla held my hands. Zab, God has plans for you. I nodded, even though I didn't know what they were. All I knew was that from then on, my path was in Christ. No matter how uncertain it was, I was safe because he walked with me. The Christian community welcomed me back as a lost sister, and that's exactly how I felt. As someone who had walked through dark valleys, survived abandonment, fear, imprisonment, and yet had come home, they hid me in a safe house, away from the watchful eyes of the authorities. The peace was fragile, fear still loomed like a shadow, but within us, there was a certainty that no human force could erase. We belonged to Christ. I spent those days in prayer, immersed in scripture, delving into the words that once seemed distant, but now burned with life in my heart. I also shared my story, and each time I told it, the pain of the past bled a little less. and my faith blossomed a little more. Over time, I realized my suffering had not been in vain. It was part of a greater purpose. God was using my scars to touch wounds I had never even known about. It was then that Amir approached me with an idea that took my breath away. "Tooth, you've been through so much. Your faith has withstood arrests, rejection, and threats. I think it's time to tell your story beyond these walls." Fear washed over me like a cold wave. Would I speak in public? Would I put myself out there again? Would I be bold again? I trembled at the thought. But when I took it to prayer, the silence turned to a clear whisper. If you remain silent, who will speak for them? With the help of Amir and Lila, I began sharing my testimony in secret meetings. At first, it was just a handful of people. Their faces were tired, their hearts thirsty, their eyes reflecting the same hunger that had once burned within me. But God moves hearts like the wind moves leaves. Word spread. Soon the meetings grew. My story was told, retold, translated, and sent through underground networks, carrying a message that was not mine, but His. Grace is stronger than fear. And then the call came. Leave. Leaving Iran was a heartbreaking decision. It was the place where I was born, where I spent my childhood, where my family still breathed. But it was also the place where my freedom was chained. I knew that by staying, I would put everyone around me at risk. With the help of the Christian community, I fled to a neighboring country. There, I finally experienced a freedom I had prayed for so long. I began writing, anonymously, for safety's sake. I shared my story with Christian organizations, recording short videos, writing essays, speaking at secret video meetings. It was strange to see my story come out of anonymity and reach the world, but it was also a miracle. Even though I was living in freedom, my heart was still in Iran. I prayed every day for my family. I didn't blame them. I just asked God to touch their hearts as He had touched mine. One day I received a message through a trusted contact. It was from my mother. "Tooth, I miss you. Your father doesn't know I'm writing, but I needed you to know. I still love you." The words ran down my eyes in the form of tears. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a crack in the wall. And sometimes, all God needs is a crack to bring forth the light. I wrote back. I told her about my love for her. I told her about Jesus. Today I live free, but I bear the marks of imprisonment, rejection, and exile. Not as shame, but as signs of grace. The faith that was born in secret has blossomed in the sight of many. I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds it. My mission is now clear, to be a voice for the persecuted, a beacon for those in doubt, a living testimony that Jesus still saves, still heals, still transforms. If there's one thing I've learned on this journey, it's this: redemption is always possible. God's grace is sufficient, and even in the darkest cells, there is light for those who look up. I end with the words that lit my heart on that lonely night. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. That rest I found. And now I offer it to the world. This is my story. This is God's grace. And this is the truth worth living for, and if necessary, dying for.